You're watching Community Conversations, a Concord TV production. Hello there, and welcome to Community Conversations. My name is Mike O'Mara. I'm the IT director as well as the city liaison here at Concord TV, and we're pleased to have you joining us today for this great edition of Community Conversations, our opportunity to talk to members of the community about some of the great things that are going on here in Concord and the greater Concord area. And today, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Clement Kigugu and Leslie Van Berkum, and they are from Overcomers Refugee Services. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here today. So, reading up a little bit on Overcomers Refugee Services and saw that the byline for the organization is educate, empower, and engage. So what does that mean, and what really is Overcomer Refugee Services, and what does it do?
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. Overcomers Refugee Services is a New Hampshire 501c3 non-profit organization whose mission is to empower a refugee to become successful, contributing member of New Hampshire society. So Overcomers Refugee Services help refugees after they are resettled in New Hampshire. So the government does help the resettlement agency. Resettlement agency are those agencies that receive the refugee from overseas, and they get funds for 6 months. And then after 6 months, they pretend or they expect them to become independent. So that's how Overcomers comes in to help refugee, because it's really not enough time for them to become independent. Yes. So Overcomers is a kind of resource center where the refugee can come and get any service they may need. So Overcomers provide different services, which is social services. Social services include medical application, Medicaid application, food stamp application, housing application, reading mail, arranging appointments, and arranging transportation to those appointments. So we also do provide employment, so pre and post-employment, helping refugee to prepare for their employment and do the follow-up after they get hired. We also help them with the cultural orientation. Even though the resettlement agency do the cultural orientation, but we still help them to understand the culture of this country, because it's kind of overwhelming for them to know everything in 6 months.
Yeah.
So we also help them with the peace building. So peace building means people or the refugee who came from overseas, they pass through many things, war, violation, and living in a refugee camp for 10 to 15 years. And some of them lost their relative, husband, wife, children. So they really have pre-trauma or trauma, and sometimes there's a conflict between tribe or conflict between husband and wife, children and parents due to different cultures. So we help them to really overcome those pains. We are not professional counselors, but we help them with our own experience. Because myself, I'm a refugee, and I passed through all those things. So we have, a good way to help them to overcome those situations they pass through. We also do have 2 educative programs, which is youth and a women group, which we educate youth with different things and women groups.
And I'll speak a little bit to our byline, which is to educate, empower, and engage. And Clement mentioning these programs is a good example, because there's an old saying that if you teach someone how to fish, they have food for the day. Right. But if you teach them how to fish, well, they can feed themselves and their families for forever. So really, the educate, empower, engage is a little bit like that. So educating people with these programs that Clement mentioned, giving them tools and knowledge to figure out how to navigate, to become a citizen, to become an independent community member. And once they have those tools, they're empowered. They feel confident, where they've never felt confident before, that so much is out of their control. And then finally, they can engage. They can engage in small ways, like at the grocery store. They can engage at work, and they can engage with their greater community. So we feel those 3 E's, as we call them, are sort of our byline, our guiding light, so to speak. And you had a short story about somebody to sort of illustrate those.
Yes. So we have a man who came as a refugee, and he really struggled to integrate in community due to accident that he had back home, and he has kind of a brain injury, and then he ended up to go to jail, and then he went out. So the Overcomers helped him to again integrate in the community. So we helped him to find a job. Now he can pay his bills, and he take care of everything by himself. Not again depending on all the help from either DHHS or City Welfare or other places.
That's excellent. That's excellent.
And also giving people an idea of all the services, ORS, as we call Overcomers, also points out where they can go to get certain help.
Yes.
So not just, us helping, but actually teaching them to help themselves. So.
Right, because there's so many, as you said, there's so many aspects to
Yes,
the
yes.
American culture that it can be really
Yeah.
overwhelming.
Yeah.
So I guess, coming to that, and of course, always immigration kind of comes out on the news media and things like that. But we're talking really about refugees, and what is that process? How does one become a refugee, and what's that difference between a refugee and an immigrant, and some of the particular challenges that a refugee might experience as they're coming to the United States?
Yeah, so refugee is someone who has been forced to flee his or her country due to war, persecution, race, religion, or political opinion. So most of the refugees that are resettled in New Hampshire are refugees who fled their country because of war. So after they left everything, so they go to the second country, and they try to found the UNHCR location or office. And so they stay in a refugee camp for 10 to 15 or 20 years, it depends, until the UNHCR found a third country where they can go. And so nobody really chose the country where they want to go. So it's a UNHCR that choose the country, unless you have your relative to any of the country that's resettled refugee, what we call US tie. If they have a friend or relative here, they may come in this country. Otherwise, they just send them whatever it is available. So that's the refugee. So immigrants are people who come here for economic opportunity or other reasons. So for Overcomers, we really focus on refugee. And so the other thing that I really wanted to mention is that the refugee, if they are picked by US, for example, so they take again 2 to 3 years to go through the screening. So they do the self-screening and health screening.
And this is after they've already spent 10 or 15 years in a refugee.
Yes.
And it's sometimes called vetting. And as Clement said, the immigrants have sometimes choose to come here for economic reasons, but often they've been persecuted as well. And you hear a lot about, in Central America and Mexico coming up, but the big difference is they're not documented. Whereas the refugees have spent, as he said, 2 years being vetted, going through application after application, waiting. Once they're refugee, they reach refugee status, they're in. But it's a long process.
Very long
process.
Yeah. So in terms of challenges, there's a lot of challenge for someone that lived in a refugee camp for 10 to 15 to 20 years. Refugee camp is not like Concord town or other cities. It's a place where there's no electricity, there's no, many cars or many roads like here in the US. But the big challenge is a language.
Right.
So someone coming in this new country without language and expected to be independent, as I said, in 6 months, it's really a big challenge. Some of us, have education back home in the country where we came from, but because of language, you cannot really find a job that you like. Some of us were teachers, professor, or whatever, but because of the language, you cannot really find a job that you like.
And I just want to interrupt there because if you don't speak the language, you might have been a professor or had a very respectable job, even a farmer, but you come off as ignorant because you don't know the language. So from the perception of the community, they don't understand that, these are very intelligent people, but they don't speak the language. So I'm sorry to interrupt that.
Yeah. So the other thing is, to know the system of this country. When I say the system, which means, you have to know how to drive, for example. Many of us, we didn't have experience to drive the car because they lived in a refugee camp.
Right.
So they expect them to know everything. From the employees, they need them to be on time to come to work every day. So the landlord want them to pay the rent on time. The hospitals, they need them to complete all the vaccine that are required by this country. So the school are expecting them to raise the kids the way they need, to be there when they need the parents. And
follow the school rules,
Yeah,
send them to
follow the
school,
school
figure
rules
that all out, calendars,
on
snow
time,
days.
and check their grade, make sure they did their homework. And in addition, some of them, they have 2 jobs. So for them to be able to cover their rent.
Right.
Because they have, entry-level job where they get minimum wage. So they have to work 2 jobs for be able to cover the rent and other expenses. So that's how really the Overcomers Refugee Services jumps in to help them to cover some of the, the thing that they may have themselves. But it's really hard to do everything in 6 months. Language, transportation, knowing all the rules and regulation and all this stuff.
That's
Tell your
incredible.
story, Clement. I mean,
Yeah.
Clement is a refugee himself. I've just jumped over your question.
oh,
like
yeah.
that.
No,
but
no,
it follows
yeah, you-
really well, right?
Right.
Yeah, so my personal story, I came from Africa too, as I said. So I had a job back home, and I was helping people in a non-profit organization like this. So I went to school, I graduated from college, and I started my first job. And then, suddenly I have to leave my country, leave my colleagues, leave my town, my friend, and
Family.
yeah, the big things, to leave my 6 beautiful children and my wife behind, not knowing when we will meet again. So it took me 1.5 years for them to get here. So when I came for the first time, I couldn't speak English. So I have to go to second star and have 2 jobs to be able to pay my rent, also to provide for my family, but I also really working hard to learn English.
Right.
So it was really a big challenge for me. But, I have to work hard. So at least to learn English and be able to do the job that I'm supposed to do. So that's how I, became a caseworker and an employment specialist and starting Overcomers. Yeah.
And I will say I met Clement when he was working for a resettlement agency, and at that point, a lot of people were calling him after he finished work to ask him questions because they had finished the resettlement process and they were still trying to figure out how to do things. So they would call him all the time. He was like, the center of the community, and I think that's what gave him the idea to start
Right.
Overcomers,
Well,
which
I
does
can't even,
that.
Yeah, I can't even imagine 6 months being, after
Yeah.
spending
Yeah.
so much time in a camp,
Yeah.
15 years in a camp, than being told this is where you're going to go and having really no choice in the matter.
Yeah.
And I don't imagine there's much educational opportunity while you're waiting to be vetted.
You don't even know
either.
what country you're going to, so
Right.
you're not even,
You just
you don't
know
even
you're
which
being
language
vetted.
you're supposed
Right,
to learn. Yeah.
right. So you don't
Yeah.
know, and then
Yeah.
suddenly you find yourself here in 6 months. You're
Yeah.
supposed to be ready.
Yeah.
What was that experience like for you when you got to that end of the 6 months? What was that like?
Yeah, it was really, really hard. As I said, that's why actually I was, inspired to start Overcomers Refugee Services to help those people who came after me, because I, wear the same hat. They're not wearing. So I struggle myself to really become independent due to the language and all the system that I didn't know. I take this opportunity to really thank the Concord community and other people, the volunteer, who also jumped in and helped us in one way or other. So they really, really, are valuable people in our refugee community. So I had some volunteer who, have to jump in and help me with, a few stuff. So after, I became pretty much independent, after 3 to 4 years. That's why I started volunteering, like giving back to, other refugee or resettlement agency or, a receiving community that helps me. So that's how I start helping other refugees, and then I get a job as a case worker, and then I became employment specialist. But again, I realized that people were calling me after hours. After hours, and they were calling me, asking me questions, and then Saturday and Sunday, and Sunday at church, they were bringing some application or mails. So I said, I have to start Overcomers kind of research center, so where people can come. I speak 5 languages, so I kind of cover all the African languages.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and other case worker who's also working with us, he also speaks several languages. So we kind of cover all the languages.
So you have a broad range of people that you can help.
And then people can walk in anytime they want to ask question or to, ask for service.
You should see the office. Languages flying everywhere. It's great.
Yes.
It's like a little mini UN.
But the most important is, as Leslie said, I realized that we still have to do all the social services and employment, but the most important is to educate people and empower them so that way they can engage and become independent, help themselves and help other people. And this needs to be done by the people who understand their language, their culture, but also who understand English and American culture. Yeah.
Become that kind of bridge to their new home. And there's a fairly substantial refugee population in Concord, especially for a city our size. How did those refugees impact our community, do you think?
I think there's 3 ways. The first is that it increases the diversity. I mean, there are nearly 800 refugees living in the greater Concord area at this point. I mean, the whole refugee program started in the 80s. But we were pretty much ethnically homogeneous at that point, and it's the diversity of everything from foods to cultural practices to just having different people, I think is wonderful. 2, I have also a business, an agricultural business, a plant nursery, with about 50 employees, and we hire refugees, and we had a terrible time finding people that could do the entry-level manual jobs, rain or shine or snow, hot, cold, hard work, and refugees have been incredible. Their work ethic, their appreciation, not to mention lunchtime, where these wonderful smells come across the break room table, and people say, what is that down there? It's just, just for our community, it's been wonderful. And the third way is what Clement just said is many times, even though they've been through horrific things, they want to give back. They appreciate what the U.S. has done for them, and Clement is a perfect example of this, who started this. That's probably one of the larger thank yous, is to start an organization like Overcomers. But even in small ways, and last June we were part of the New Hampshire Gives program,
yes.
and
Yep.
it was mostly, hopefully, larger donors, but our clients came in and emptied their pockets. Whatever change they could, so that there is a true sense of wanting to give back or to volunteer, maybe not just with the refugee community, but even with other communities that could use help, like the homeless. We're not the only community that could use help, and I think the refugees want to give back in so many ways. So I think that's how they impact the community. And speaking of education, I also think it's important to educate, and that's kind of what we're doing today, the community about refugees,
Right.
and maybe clear up some of the myths about the whole program.
Process.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, I'm learning a tremendous amount
cool.
myself, and it's just so impressive to hear people who have gone through very difficult and hard times, and once you get through that, your desire is to make it less difficult and better
Yeah.
for that kind of selfless nature. It's not an idea of, well, I went through it and it made me stronger, well, you should do it too.
Yeah.
It's no, let's make it easier so that we can get to a better place together. That seems to be one of the messages.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So if somebody's watching right now or they're listening on the podcast or something like that, we're already hearing, the refugees themselves do so much to volunteer and give back, but what can other members of the community do to help overcomers or help refugees in general? What can we do to participate in the program or even just educate ourselves, besides watching today?
That's awesome right there. And I would say volunteer. I started as a volunteer almost 2 years ago, and it's been incredibly rewarding. And we're just building our volunteer program, but there's driving, there's working with clients, joining one of the programs that Clement mentioned, like the women's group or the youth group, office work. So volunteering is probably the first way if people are interested. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a link on our website.
And what is that website?
So
It's overcomersnewhampshire.org.
org.
Yeah.
Overcomersnewhampshire.org. And another way, Clement?
Yeah, another way is financial part.
Yes.
Of course.
Money!
That's true.
So financial is really part of, for organization to be able to be there to help refugee. So we, new organization, but we are lucky to have, again, Concord and New Hampshire community to be able to help us in churches, but we still really need financial assistance, donation to be able to keep going, with paying offices and stuff, so that way we can keep our job.
We're really looking for corporate donors that, that are interested in giving to a program like this on a yearly basis or a regular basis.
Yeah.
And another way is spreading the word. Going to our website, we have a Facebook page, and just sharing with their friends via word of mouth or social media. That's another way that people could help if they want to help.
Yeah. And if they have a question, they really are free to contact us through our website or email. And so our office is located at 90 Airport Road, room 25, here in Concord, New Hampshire. So we are really open. Website, Facebook page, or location.
Or walk in the
phone.
office.
Walk in the
Just
office.
come to Airport Road and walk in, and we'll give you a short, small tour. It's a small space. Yeah.
That's great, just to hear all the different languages, I think.
Yeah.
That would be great. Any parting words that you'd like to give to the audience?
If you have something, I'm just going to say something first, is that the other thing we're interested in is building coalition with other groups. Both groups that work with refugees, and there are several around New Hampshire. Concord is one of the very few cities that resettles. Manchester, Nashua are the others right now, because cities have to have a certain list of criteria in order to resettle.
Right.
Which we don't have to go into now, but we're interested in working with other agencies that help the homeless, mentally challenged, any other group that's helping people in the community. We'd like to build coalitions and share resources. I think that's something that we're working towards.
Yeah.
We're a new organization, but
Right.
that's a goal of ours.
And that's really important. We have very good relationship with the provider in Concord, Concord Police, New Hampshire Police, and Concord Hospital, Family Health Center, schools. And we really want to continue to work together, for the common goal to help refugee to be able to integrate in our society and be really a contributing member of New Hampshire.
Which you've helped us do
Yeah.
in this program. Thank
Yeah.
you, Mike.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's our plate. This is community
Yeah,
conversation.
exactly.
So it's this
Yeah,
sort of
yeah,
stuff that's
perfect.
really, really important to us.
Mhm.
So Clement, Leslie, thank you so much for
you.
being here and
Yeah.
representing Overcomers Refugee Services. It was great to hear your story today and learn about what you do, and hopefully those that are watching at home can get involved, whether it's volunteering, making a financial contribution, however it is, whether it's this community organization, Overcomers, or just be involved in your community and pay attention to shows like this,
Yeah.
Community Conversations. I'm your host, Mike O'Mara. Of course, you can watch this on YouTube. You can watch this on our traditional cable channel 22. And you can find the podcast of this show on SoundCloud. So on behalf of everybody here, thank you so much for watching or listening, and we'll catch you next time when we have a conversation about the community of Concord.